Back in April, we spoke with political consultant Peter Feld about something big: the collapse of support for Israel among the Democratic base, and how that shift might reshape American politics. Back then, Feld pointed to the New York City mayoral race as a test case. At that time, Zohran Mamdani, a long shot candidate and proud supporter of Palestinian rights, was trailing behind establishment heavyweight Andrew Cuomo. Cuomo leaned hard into his record of support for Israel, even going so far as to attack Mamdani for backing BDS and calling out Israel's genocide in Gaza. Now, Zohran Mamdani has won. Today, our U.S. correspondent, Michael Aria, speaks with Peter Feld again to break down this historic victory and what it means for the future of democratic politics. As Feld put it, it's proven that Zionism is a paper tiger in democratic politics, and the emperor has no clothes. Thanks for listening. This is the Mondoweiss podcast.
Maybe let's start there. I'm wondering, as somebody who followed this race closely, we were talking about it kind of in depth back in April. Before we get to breaking some of this stuff down, I'm just wondering, what about last night surprised you? The margin certainly, I think, surprised a lot of people. It seemed like, Mamdani pulling ahead in some of those recent polls suggested he might have a chance, but he was seemingly still viewed by many as kind of a long shot candidate, and it was pretty definitive. This thing got wrapped up seemingly like, he was declaring victory before midnight. So what stood out to you last night? What surprised you? What was different than what you expected, even if you were maybe expecting a Mamdani victory and a Cuomo loss?
I didn't let myself have too many expectations because we've seen so much of a range of results in elections like this. But in the afternoon, I had a feeling that it might be like a set of elections that took place in 2018. When you had AOC win in the June primary for Congress, and then you had in September a set of primaries at the state and local level where Democrats that were battling a group of Republican-aligned Democrats called the IDC ended up sweeping and, much greater than anybody's expectations. And I was afraid to predict such a great result, but I was able to see how it could happen because Mamdani had such a strong field operation, and we knew that they dominated the early vote. Most of the pundits expected the election day vote to be very different and very pro-Cuomo. So all day long, people were watching the votes come in at a large number and saying, "Oh, well, there's good vibe in Cuomo land now. They think they've dodged the bullet." And then it turned out that the election day vote was similar to the early vote, not very different. And I think what may have happened is that the same field operation that turned out people for Zohran in the early vote was able to do the same thing for the election day vote, and that Cuomo didn't have a turnout election, and that his campaign was the opposite of inspiring. So I think the result makes sense more in retrospect than I think I or a lot of other people ever allowed ourselves to hope.
I wanted to talk about the Cuomo campaign a little. I in no way want to diminish what Mamdani did, but as you say, he ran this seemingly terrible campaign. I mean, yesterday I saw a tweet from somebody saying he has it's election day, he has no scheduled appearances, and he doesn't know where he's going to be when the results come in. There's a piece the other day, kind of, I think 44 or some number like that of Democrats who had called on him to resign, who backed him, which just seemed ridiculous. And then you have this last minute Bill Clinton endorsement of all things. What did you think? I mean, this is a guy who was governor. I know, like, there's a lot of issues with him, obviously, but what did you make of his campaign, and why do you think it was so terrible?
What you're talking about, the poor quality of the Cuomo campaign and their reliance on these desperation endorsements that started to really flood in, is kind of the contempt that we saw that the establishment has for rank and file Democrats, and that it was almost like, we don't need to have a great campaign. We don't need to do anything at all. We're just going to power over you like a bulldozer, you progressives. And we don't need to inspire. We don't need to have a great program. We just need, the dull weight of all that money from Bill Ackman and all those, endorsements from Bill Clinton, Larry Summers, and I think what happened was it became an emergency for the establishment. And so they started throwing everything they could. They just saw uh, Zohran as an existential threat, and they threw everything they could at it. I mean, the $20 million super PAC with money from DoorDash and Bill Ackman and Michael Bloomberg. You saw, all the stuff being thrown at Zohran, and this time they couldn't do it. It reminds me a little bit of what happened with Bernie. That the they needed to crush Bernie back in 2020, and they simply could not allow him to become the Democratic nominee. It wasn't because they were afraid he'd lose to Trump. It was because they were afraid he'd win. And I don't think we should miss the degree to which this existential threat really came because of Israel. Because if you think about it, Zohran was criticized as a socialist. He has all these impractical ideas, but his program was free buses, universal childcare, uh, um, uh, freeze the rent, and pay for it by taxing the rich. So rewind, Michael Bloomberg, when he was mayor in the wake of 9/11, taxed the rich. Michael Bloomberg called for free crosstown buses. And now Eric Adams supposedly supports free buses. Bill de Blasio throws the rent. Bill de Blasio provided universal pre-K. So it's not that those elements of Mamdani's program were so frightening. It was really the ascendancy of the progressive movement, and I really think you cannot leave Israel out of that equation at all. And I just want to back up. Maybe you can shift this around a little bit, because we have to look at what this kind of a victory, this like stunning transformational victory, means for, number one, it's generational, and it's generational in the same way that Israel is. That there's a huge split among Americans, less so among Democrats now on Israel, and there was a huge generational split in New York City over Cuomo versus Mamdani. The victory also means so much for the Muslim community. This community that's been ignored has had its needs and its pain ignored by every statewide and citywide leader, Democratic and other, in New York City. They've been surveilled. They've really been brutalized, and we just have to take a moment to savor this. And this is what rose up, and this is what defeated the toxicity of Andrew Cuomo. I mean, they were so desperate to stop Mamdani that they would rally around, a disgraced ex-governor who had to resign because of sexual harassment. He was corrupt. He was vindictive. He was a bully. And 44 of the people that called on him to resign, like you said, ended up endorsing him. It just shows that the lengths that they would go to defeat us, but it also shows that just doesn't work anymore.
I want to talk about Israel, which, I actually want to credit you, because I'm going to quote you here. You had said, I think Cuomo and some of the other candidates are expecting that Mamdani's support for Palestine in the end is going to hold them back and allow other candidates to get past him. I think Cuomo's attempt to Israelize the election is going to backfire, and this could actually help Mamdani and give them the further strength to overtake him. we've seen, starting with that primary where, which was just insane, like which foreign country would you visit? And, grilling him in what was supposed to be a lightning round about do you support a Jewish state? And then, um, the New York Times, I was thinking of the Klobuchar Warren double endorsement. It was just like such an insane op-ed. And then this Colbert thing the other night, which I thought, ostensibly something of a liberal, and I thought even like his questions were pretty ridiculous. There's been this full court press from liberal establishment and the right wing press on this issue, and Cuomo has completely leaned into it. We've seen so many smears of him as a anti-Semite. How do you think Israel factored into this election? And do you think it, like you said, it seems like it sure hurt Cuomo down the stretch, and it seemed like even Mamdani leaned into it and talked about the issue more as his polling kind of shifted in conjunction with him kind of bringing up these issues more, getting smeared for saying he believed in equal rights, essentially saying he doesn't believe in apartheid state. What did you make of Israel and Palestine and all of this in Gaza?
Well, I would say a few things. In all the polling that we've discussed before, over and over again shows that the Democratic base is, siding heavily with Palestine. And in New York City, you had a poll that among Democrats by 53 to 31%, voters don't believe that it's important to have a mayor that takes a pro-Israel stance. I believe that was Marist. If I could check that and correct that later, and give you the link. The question I've been asking, and we've discussed before, is when will we ever be able to take all that support for Palestine to the bank and cash it in? And it was going to take somebody not being afraid of the issue and embracing it, as Mamdani did. And so I would say we did just cash it in. We finally have proved, that these scare tactics over Israel don't work anymore. I'd go further. I would say Zionism is dead in the Democratic Party now. That Mamdani did lean in. There was a tweet that said the galaxy brain approach to what he was doing with his defense of people who say globalize the Intifada is that he wanted to talk about that. That was a good issue for him, especially since he's mobilizing so many young people. And you also had at the same time, it's not trivial that the final days of this campaign took place as the attack on Iran was escalating, and the U.S. went and bombed. Now we know, so it's not just Zionism that's dead. I think the pro-war Democrats in Congress are, extremely out of step with the base, and obviously not just in New York, but you have Chuck Schumer, trolling Trump from the right about caving into the Iranians. You had yesterday, I believe, 128 Democrats voting against impeaching Trump over the unprovoked aggression against Iran. And I think those people need to look out. 87% of Democrats disapprove of the attack in Iran and the base. So there's a complete disconnect between establishment Democrats, the security Democrats, and the Democratic base, and it's coming to a head. During that election, back up. During those final days, Cuomo and Mamdani both released statements about the Iran war. Cuomo's was first and foremost, Iran must never get a nuclear bomb, and went on that direction. He criticized Trump only for the unconstitutionality of bombing Iran without congressional approval, but did not really disapprove of the bombing itself. Zohran Mamdani came out with a major statement that was very generational, that war is all that we've known if you're 45 and under. And it was a viral statement. It had, I think it might have close to 2 million views right now on Twitter. And I really felt that was going to play into all of this, although there's so many issues in an election, you never know for sure. But you know, the there's such a difference also in, you know, I mean, I would add, by the way, Hakeem Jeffries and all those people to the list of pro-war Democrats that should really be thinking. You have to look at not just how this issue played out in terms of public opinion, but how did it play out in terms of enthusiasm and excitement. You know, contrast the extreme uptick in participation that Mamdani was able to get in this election, turning out, who knows how many thousands of young people, first time voters, I think were 25% of the electorate. Compare that with Kamala Harris last year and her contrived, consultant driven babble, I would say, that severely suppressed the Democratic turnout so that she got 7 million votes fewer than Biden had gotten in 2020. We saw the same thing, by the way, it's not really about Israel, but we saw in 2022 when Hochul ran for re-election as governor, it severely depressed Democratic turnout. So here's somebody who embraces issues and isn't afraid of Gaza, isn't afraid to speak out, um, uh, you know, doesn't cower, and he boosted Democratic turnout, at least among the base. And so the very things that Mamdani was attacked for about Israel were intrinsic to his ability to mobilize the young. Um, Max Blumenthal used to talk about what he would call the Zionist jailbreak, which is when everybody realizes it's safe to come out and say what you really think. And I think we just had a Zionist jailbreak, um, despite the fact that Zohran called what Israel is doing a genocide. He pointedly refused to embrace Israel as a as a democratic Jewish state or as a Jewish state. He defended people who say globalize the Intifada. They even came out with a rap video that he recorded in 2017 where he shouted out the Holy Land Five, who, which is a group of people, who a lot of the London Review of Books and a lot of evidence was presented that they were framed for providing humanitarian aid in Gaza and accused of providing material support to Hamas. Um, and none of this stopped him. The Canary Mission came out with an attack ad against against Mamdani on this issue of the Holy Land Five, and Cuomo picked it up, and it just did nothing. They've proven that Zionism now is a paper tiger in democratic politics, and that the emperor has no clothes.
I want to quickly bring this up. I not to put a damper on things, but I think anybody who, progressives, leftists in terms of electoral politics, understandably have some PTSD in regard and because of the Bernie situation. There's already these kind of calls. Front of the New York Post today, asking who will save the city from Mamdani. Eric Adams already positioning himself as potentially that guy. Calls for certain people to drop out. The Cuomo looming piece in the Intercept yesterday. Maybe Cuomo can still win this. How concerned should people be of the potential India Walton situation this time around?
The fight isn't over, but I don't think they're going to be able to create another India Walton situation, which, for readers who don't know, was a progressive who won a Democratic primary for mayor of Buffalo against an incumbent mayor who was considered, quite a political hack. And then the Democratic establishment abandoned their own nominee and rallied behind the incumbent mayor for a write-in campaign and ended up defeating India Walton in the general election. So I don't think we're going to see that here in New York City for quite a few reasons. Number one, who are they going to beat him with? Cuomo is disgraced and has already failed and is not going to get better and may not even want to do this. He may lose so decisively after the ranked choice vote tabulations come in, and presumably, since Brad Lander campaigned so closely with Zohran Mamdani in the weeks leading up to the election, Lander's healthy share of the vote, about 13%. I can check afterwards. Most of that is likely to go to Mamdani in the final tabulation of the ranked choice votes. So Cuomo is likely to come out even further behind than he is right now after the votes are tabulated and released next Tuesday, July 1st, when we have the official result. Eric Adams, for his part, has an 83% unfavorable rating among Democrats. That's pretty steep. And the moderate establishment is divided and they don't like each other. Cuomo doesn't like Adams anymore. Adams doesn't like Cuomo. They'll battle each other if they both run. There's a Republican, kind of a clown, Curtis Sliwa, who will take a lot of Republican votes. That doesn't mean we progressives can let up at all. It's going to take a lot of work to ensure this result, and then to ensure that Mamdani can succeed as mayor. The threats against progressive change are constant, and as we've learned, the empire strikes back, and you can never bask in your victory either when you're running for office or when you're governing. But I believe that a lot of the Democratic establishment that's not as dug in as the people who really, drove the Cuomo campaign are going to see the writing on the wall. For example, the very establishment Brooklyn Democratic leader Rodney's Bishat Hermelin, who was one of your 44 who called on Cuomo to resign in 2021, but then endorsed him this year. She's on television now saying that she's going to support Mamdani as the Democratic nominee. So I don't think that the more self-interested parts of the establishment coalition are going to see tremendous upside in fighting this tidal wave that they just got swamped with yesterday.
Yeah, that's my final question, actually. That's a good lead in. I saw even the governor of New York, who is obviously centrist and does not have great poll numbers, saying that she hears the people of New York loud and clear that they want more affordable housing and change, and that she's looking forward to speaking to Mamdani in the coming days. I didn't quote your entire paragraph when I read our April interview back to you. The last part of that quote, when you said that Mamdani could take over Cuomo, you said, if that happens, I think it's going to set the table for some of the primaries next year. So I know it's very early. I mean, this just happened, but how do you, it sounds like you do foresee it kind of influencing this next round of Democrats. And it's a very interesting situation because they're also obviously going to be running against the Trump agenda. So in some ways, it seems like a storm is brewing in that regard, where Mamdani has laid, and people said this last night, has kind of laid out a path for the left to win.
I think that Mamdani certainly did not only lay out a path, but he gave so much energy to this drive for change. The Democratic base wants change, both within the Democratic Party and in doing a better job of fighting Trump. So Sunrise Movement tweeted this morning the very same thing, that there are only 8 months until the first Democratic primaries next year for Congress, and that more or less we're coming for you. I think almost immediately, even before this election, people were starting to say that Brad Lander, who helped himself so much with the way that he gave support and credibility to Mamdani, is now a prime candidate to defeat Dan Goldman in New York's 10th congressional district. If Goldman even decides to run for re-election, he may try for attorney general, it's been said, but that would depend on Letitia James running for governor. I don't know that she's going to do that. But yes, Dan Goldman is looking, should be looking around nervously. Another example would be, frankly, Hakei Jeff, who is, part of the War Coalition, part of the group of establishment consultant-driven Democrats that won't stand up on the war, only on the process by which the strikes on Iran were were ordered. And in the first mayoral debate, all of the candidates were asked who they think is a rising leader in in the Democratic Party, and half of the candidates on the stage said Hakeem Jeffries. Well, Hakeem Jeffries may not be a viable leader in his own district. There's a lot of talk that State Senator Jabari Brisport, who's very, very charismatic, who was part of the wave of new young progressive leaders who came up in 2018 and 2020, could be a viable challenger to Hakeem Jeffries. And frankly, it needs to happen because the Democrats may retake the House next year, and the only people that could stop warmonger Hakeem Jeffries, who once echoed George Wallace who said segregation now, segregation today, segregation forever. Hakeem Jeffries some years ago said Israel today, Israel tomorrow, Israel forever. The only voters who can stop him from becoming Speaker of the House are the Democratic primary voters in New York's 8th congressional district, and I hope they do get the chance to stop him.